Chapter 2. A Tear in Her Eye. Profoundly impacted by my short Saturday afternoon meeting with Val, I forgot all about the basketball tournament. I didn't want to watch another game. This not only surprised my friend Meyer, but it also irritated him. He was forced to sit by himself, surrounded by people he neither knew nor liked. But I didn't care. Basketball no longer seemed important. Nothing mattered other than my desire to see Val again. Besides, Meyer had a steady girlfriend at Baylor, a gorgeous co-ed with long blonde hair and a figure to die for named Diane Thornton, a girl he intended to marry. Obviously, I didn't have a girlfriend. I knew he wouldn't remain cross with me for long, which he didn't. Guys are rarely petty about things like this, not like girls can be. I finally had lunch after my initial encounter with Val, but I don't even remember what I ate. All I could think about was her kiss. I was not only surprised it happened, but I was even more surprised by how deeply it impacted me. Its intensity and passion rattled me in a way I never could have anticipated. I wasn't emotionally prepared for what happened, that's for sure, especially since it happened so soon after we met. I wondered, could anybody be prepared for something like this? It felt like I had been struck by lightning. Nothing as powerful as this had ever happened to me, but I certainly wasn't complaining, not in the least. With just one kiss, I was hooked. My platonic high-mindedness turned into carnal desire in less than a New York second. Instantly, I was consumed by my desire for her. Val realized this would happen, obviously, but I certainly didn't. The incident also forced me to admit the depth of my naivete in the ways of the world. Most 20-year-old guys are rookies where women are concerned, despite boasting about their romantic conquests, but I was more naive than I thought. This was particularly true back in the mid-'60s, just before the era of free love swept the nation. Although I never willingly admitted to being as naive as I was, Val's kiss demonstrated this to me in spades. But I wanted more of it. I felt certain I was about to advance from playing ball in the farm system to becoming a major leaguer. It was a transition I was anxious to make, just like nearly every other guy my age. As I reflected about the passion that transpired between us, which intensified every time I thought about it, stirring me in unfamiliar ways, my speculation was that she kissed me like she did because she felt trapped. She didn't really want the confines that awaited her as a married woman. Obviously, she had misgivings about becoming Mrs. Charles Roderick Appleyard III. Otherwise, she would never have been so open and honest with me, nor would she have kissed me as passionately as she did in the first place. She probably wouldn't have even spoken to me. My conclusion was that she wanted to be rescued from marrying her fiancé. At least, I hoped that was what she wanted. If this was her goal, I was just the man for the job. I conjectured that by accepting Appleyard's proposal, she was trading her happiness and personal fulfillment for a lifetime of security and entitled leisure. The role she was destined to play would make her an appendage of his forever. She would have to find value in being arm candy, which would make her a non-person her entire life. Despite the downside to such a barter, this was a deal most co-eds at Ole Miss would eagerly make. Because of her financial situation and limited prospects, Val must have thought she had hit the jackpot, a conclusion regularly confirmed by her Chi Omega sorority sisters. As the time for her anticipated nuptials shortened, obviously she had become hesitant about what awaited her. At least, this was my assumption. If she had been at peace with her decision, she would never have given me the time of day, let alone kissed me the way she did. My theory was that she wanted more from life than to be confined by the trappings of an attorney's wife, living out her days in meaningless ignominy in Meridian, Mississippi, getting pedicures and playing bridge while gossiping with her girlfriends, having babies, and getting fat. I wondered what she must have been thinking when she first spotted me as I walked by sporting my Texas-sized smile. To her, it must have felt like I was a life buoy, being thrown her way as she sank deeper into her sea of despair. I could have been mistaken about my speculations, obviously, but it was the only explanation that made sense. It didn't seem possible that she lacked the character necessary to refrain from getting involved with another man while being betrothed to Appleyard. That she possibly lacked core integrity wasn't a consideration, not in my mind anyway. I wouldn't allow myself to entertain such a thought, nor did I consider the possibility that I might be doing something wrong. This thought never entered my mind, nor would it for many years. I've always heard that love clouds your judgment, which those who are engulfed in it refuse to acknowledge. I was already in love, so the thoughts that raced through my mind that afternoon were about making plans for the future, not about any downside to what had happened or what potentially might happen. As we parted, Val asked me to contact her 2 hours later, which I did right after I finished eating. She asked if I would be willing to spend the remainder of my time in Oxford with her, which was precisely what I had prayed she would suggest. I jumped at the opportunity, pleased she was willing to cancel a date with her fiancé to spend additional time with me. Breaking her date also indicated her interest in me was as intense as mine was in her. That our relationship was impulsive was obvious, but this enhanced its excitement in spades. When we initially encountered one another, which I considered to be by divine appointment, Val certainly wasn't looking for an alternative relationship to replace her engagement. Nevertheless, I showed up, unraveling her tenuous commitment to marry Appleyard. It also meant our second meeting would be more important than our first. We intended to have dinner at some out-of-the-way place when we reconvened at 7 p.m. When she walked up to greet me at the scheduled time, I couldn't believe how beautiful she looked. She actually radiated. Or perhaps it was the penumbra from the glow on my face that illuminated her. I couldn't be certain which it was, but her radiance was real. Val informed me that Charles balked when she broke their date. Despite this, she carefully pointed out that with his bar exam looming shortly after graduation, he needed the time to study. Admitting the wisdom of her reasoning helped assuage his ruffled feathers. Once placated, he returned to his books, while Val returned to me, exactly as she had planned. When she told me this, I'm the one who radiated, and it showed. I was so happy to spend time with her that it never occurred to me that she had manipulated and deceived her fiancé to make it happen. Instead, I chose to focus exclusively on the positive aspects of our relationship. It wasn't that Val and I were just attracted to each other physically, which was obvious. We had much more in common than chemistry. Not only did we genuinely like each other, but our value systems were also nearly identical. This included our desire to make our lives count for the Lord by serving Him. That she was a believer pleased me, but to be honest, I was so enamored with her I would have pursued the relationship regardless of what she believed. Her motives were entirely different. Since her fiancé consistently ridiculed her beliefs, often mocking her faith, she had developed strong misgivings about spending the rest of her life with Charlie. When she confided this to me, I understood completely, knowing that relationships rarely work when the man and woman are unequally yoked. Marrying a scoffer would have torn Val's heart apart, producing a profound sense of despair and hopelessness, feelings she was already beginning to experience. Perhaps the difference between Charlie and me was so obvious she could see it instantly. That she was pulling away from him emotionally seemed perfectly reasonable to me, but it may not have been that clear to him. Love seems to provide different conclusions for different people, often profound ones. It seemed equally obvious that Val was unwilling to get involved with another scoffer, someone who didn't share her born-again worldview. That we maintained the same spiritual commitment connected us to one another at a deep level almost instantly. As I saw it, being a Christian was my ace of trumps. Because my faith was solid, thanks to my upbringing and my commitment to Believer's Crusade, she viewed me as the type of man she needed to marry. Having no reservations or misgivings about my value system, my spiritual commitment, or my direction in life, she knew she could be herself and not be mocked for it. Because we embraced each other's values, it was also much easier for me to be myself. We didn't have to play games, which was refreshing for both of us. To Val, despite Charles's pedigree and financial prospects, I appeared to be a more suitable marriage partner. Such thinking is always important to college girls by the time they reach their junior year, if not earlier. Guys rarely think this way. All they think about is you-know-what, but girls aren't like that. It seems to me that guys promise love to get sex, while girls provided sex to get love. At least, that's the way I saw things back then, when the world was much simpler. At dinner, we discussed topics ranging from politics to child rearing. Coming from Alabama, her family loved Governor George Wallace, whose segregationist policies seemed bizarre to me. But I certainly didn't express my viewpoint. I refused to be quarrelsome. Being so wasn't even a consideration, regardless of what she believed. When we finished, I paid the bill, leaving a generous tip. Since it was still early, Val suggested we take a ride in her 1964 royal blue Chevy Impala SS convertible with bone leather interior, one of the most beautiful cars General Motors ever produced. Despite living on a tight budget, her paternal grandmother had given Val the car the year before, shortly before the woman died. It was a stunning vehicle. Leaving the restaurant, Val headed out of Oxford, traveling north toward Lake Sardis. Once we were out in the country, she put the top down and turned up the radio, which was just the way I liked it. I can still remember the songs that played. I Feel Fine by the Beatles, You've Lost That Loving Feeling by the Righteous Brothers, and Love Potion No. 9 by the Searchers. It was a wonderful drive. Already wrapped up in each other emotionally, connecting deeply, it appeared that neither of us had a care in the world. These were the salad days of our youth, days that seemed like they would never end, but always do, often abruptly. Pulling up to an abandoned dock overlooking the lake, the view was spectacular. With just a quarter moon, the stars were bright, and the spring air still had a hint of coolness to it that made the evening very pleasant. When Val turned the engine off, she looked at me. Seeing that her hands were trembling, I realized she was nervous. So was I. Despite this, I took charge immediately. Since Impalas didn't have bucket seats, I clasped her right hand firmly and pulled her toward me, gently but confidently. There was neither hesitation nor resistance on her part. Instead, she scooted toward me eagerly, making her skirt rise up well above her knees. Seeing her beautiful legs inflamed my passion. An instant later, we were locked in an embrace that was intense, filled with desire. For years, I had heard people talk about having chemistry. I thought I knew what that meant, but obviously, I had no idea. I didn't have a clue. Nobody ever does until it becomes their own experience. We remained at the lake, wrapped up in each other's arms for several hours. It was a time I will cherish and never forget. We didn't go all the way, but we came closer than I had ever come before. Despite my training from Believer's Crusade, along with all the admonitions I had been given by my parents and Bible teachers, none of it was as powerful as what transpired between Val and me in the front seat of her Impala that evening. But I'll go no further. I prefer to be discreet than gratuitous. Suffice it to say, our connection intensified appreciably. By the time she dropped me off, there was nothing in the world that mattered to me, except for Val, and I had only known her for 10 hours. The following day, I only saw her briefly before Meyer and I headed back to Waco. She kissed me lightly on the lips. When she did, she put her hand on my cheek tenderly. Turning away quickly, she walked off, but I spotted a tear in her eye. I may have had one in mine as well. Less than a minute later, Meyer put the car in drive, and we headed west toward the Lone Star State.